everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and I want to say a really big welcome to you if this is one of my first videos you've watched, because I have had quite a few new subscribers over the last week and I'm delighted. So thank you very much for being here and for having a look at my channel and seeing what it's all about. I make videos for beginner and improver sewists, and therefore if you've either sewn before or you've new to sewing, hopefully there'll be something for you in this video, especially if you've not made a felt character before, because they are really lovely to make. It's a great project, and I really do enjoy making them and showing you how to make them as well, and just how to use your machine to the best effect when dealing with such small parts you know, of the garments for construction. So hopefully that'll all help. But today we're going to be working on this little character here, who is Lillian the Lamb, and she's from Lilly Rose Dolls. And I want to say a really big thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls, because they have gifted the kit to me in order that I can bring this video to you. So whether this is your first character you're making or whether you've made some before, I want to encourage you to have a go at making this. I'll pop the website up here for you so that you can go on and order your kit if you haven't, and then you'll be able to sew along with me. So I hope that you get used to the formats for my videos. They can be quite lengthy, but the idea is that you just stop and start, and when you watch the videos on YouTube, you'll actually see that there's a red bar underneath the video, and that tells you how far you've got through it. So you know, you can watch me for 20 minutes if that's all you've got today, and then come back to that in a couple of days time, and you'll see where that post is, and you'll be able to move along to that timestamp and be able to carry on watching again. So you know, that's something just to remember, because although the videos do look quite long, I try to pack a lot of detail into them in order that you can use your machine for sewing these smaller garments, and that you can enjoy and get a good result that you're really happy with. So that's the idea. If you're not a subscriber already, then and you enjoy the content as we get through it, I'd love you to consider joining as well, and letting me know that you're there. That's always great, but there's no pressure. So today we're going to be sewing Lillian the Lamb. She is 22 inches tall, which is about 53 centimetres, so she's a big one, but I think that that's really going to help us see all of the detail in her dress. And whilst we've got an illustration on the front here, you might have been lucky enough to see Claire and Richard at one of the shows in the UK, on the Quilt Shows, Festival of Quilts. I know they've just been to in August 2024, and you might have seen the displays there, and it really is a joy to behold, to see the work and the designs of Claire. They are really fabulous and a pleasure to make. So I hope to take any stress out of it for you, and we're going to sew along today to make Lillian, and then the parts will come in turn as we work our way through her clothes until you've got a complete doll there for you to enjoy and admire for years to come. So I'll just tilt the camera down and then we'll get started. Excuse the car noise, I will close the window in a second, and I hope you enjoy sewing along with me today. Okay, so I've just gone into my little box, which is great for keeping all of your patterns and everything else together, so hold on to your boxes, and I've just taken out the instruction pages, because the first thing that we want to do, I mean obviously you want to read through your instructions and have a look at those, but I've made some Lilly Rose Dolls patterns before, so I kind of know which bits I'm going to do. But if this is your first one, I would suggest you read through all of these stages first. But what I've done is I've then gone to the pages for the patterns, and I either use tracing paper to trace off these patterns, or you're going to use it and put it onto card. Now the thing that you have to remember with the Lilly Rose Dolls patterns is that you need to add your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's what I've done just here. I just do this on the master pattern, so I'm only doing it once, because if ever I lose this pattern piece once I've cut it out, let me get my words right. I always trace my pattern pieces off, so I've added the seam allowance onto the master pattern before I've traced it off onto tracing paper. That way, if ever I lose my tracing paper copy, I can come back to this and my seam allowance is already on there again, just for me to trace a copy off again. Originally, I didn't used to do this. I used to draw around the sewing line, and then I used to put my seam allowance onto my tracing paper, but in doing that, if I lost a pattern piece, I'd then have to come back and put it back on again. So this is the way that I decided was better to do it in the end. I'm used to domestic sewing as well, so I tend to draw my seam allowance, then I follow the edge of the seam allowance with the presser foot, and I'll show you how I do that when I'm sewing it. But if you're more used to working with a sewing line, then you might just want to cut out your pattern here as a sewing line. I do recommend though that you keep your pattern pieces intact, even if you take one copy and just keep it with your box, because if ever you do lose a piece, you're going to want to be able to replace that without having to buy the pattern again. And therefore, being as this is a kit where it's not a PDF pattern, you'll need to keep a copy intact. So it's one tip that I really do recommend that you do. On some pieces though, I haven't added some seam allowance, so like on the arm and also on the body, and on the legs, the only seam allowance I've added is on the bottom edge of here where that is going to be sewn, but the rest of it I have not added seam allowance to those pieces. But for the ear, the two pieces of the side head and front head I have done, the sole of the shoe I have, the head bit here I have, and the head gusset I have as well, so that we've got all of those together onto the clothes. So those are the bits that you want to do, and what I've done is I've put some of them onto cardboard, because obviously I probably intend to make this again because I think she's absolutely adorable. But as I say, there's some pieces that haven't got the seam allowance added on. So the body, the arm and the leg. So the only seam allowance here is on this bottom edge, just here, flat edge there. So those three pieces haven't got seam allowance on. I'll tell you why in a second or two. But then all of the other pieces here, so the head gusset, the front head, the front nose, the ear, the side head and the sole of the foot, they've all got seam allowance on. And on these I've just traced it out on my tracing paper, and then I've just put glue on the other side, and I've just attached it to some card, because that makes it nice and easy then to hold on to my fabric and then just to draw around. If you're using tracing paper, then you can just pin the tracing paper onto your fabric, and then you can draw around it or cut it out with your seam allowance on as you're doing that. I hope that all makes sense. If that was a bit too fast for you, bearing in mind that I've made 3 or 4 of the Lilly Rose Dolls patterns now, if you look for the beginner series on Lilly Rose Dolls in my Lilly Rose Dolls playlist, then you will find a step-by-step guide to how to add the seam allowance and how to go around the curves. So I'll link that video here, but if you look for that video, then that will help you in breaking down the steps a little bit further for you. But if you've already made these before, again, I don't know if this is the first video you've watched of mine or the 10th, then I'm sort of jumping ahead on some steps because I know that they're in more detail on other videos, but we'll still go together, don't worry about that. So the next thing then you want to do is go into your kit, and we want to be finding our fabric. So we're going to be working with our faux fur, which is this one here. We're going to be working with our off-white felt, which is this one here. And also you want the fabric for the inner ear as well, which we've got just here, which is nicely labelled. Everything else can just be put away for the time being and put over to one side, and we'll come on to that later. So let's have a look first. Let's start nice and easy. Let's do our inner ear. So we've got our piece of fabric for our inner ear here, which is this lovely little ditzy print here, and we've got our little staples. Let me just take our staple out because we don't need that on anymore now. And then what we're going to do is find our ear pattern. We're going to fold this fabric in half, and then we'll be able to pop on our ear pattern on there, and then be able to cut that out. So I've actually just found my heat erasable pen. This is just a erasable gel pen. You do want to just test these onto things because you need to make sure that the ink will come out. So just test it on a scrap first. And there has been reports that sometimes if items that you've marked with the erasable ink get very, very cold, that the ink does come back again. So you've got to just be aware of that. If you're marking something where you've got a seam allowance, you should be fairly okay because the mark's going to be on the inside of your character, your pattern piece, and also any marks that come back would be on the inside. But if you were actually marking your stitching line on something quite delicate, you might want to be careful then that you've not got, and this one's a black pen, but you just want to make sure that it's not too permanent for you. And also you can draw on the fabric with this, and then you just use an iron, just take it off. The other thing that I've got is this chalk pencil here, and I've got some pink lead in there at the moment, some pink chalk, so I think I'm actually going to just use that. I think that's the less risky of the options on this particular piece. So I'm just holding my pattern piece down onto my folded fabric, and I'm just drawing around the outside of that cardboard piece. I'm going to take that off, and then without moving my piece, I'm just going to put a couple of pins in. You can't put the pins in first because the fabric, the cardboard template would then be bumpy, and you'd possibly just distort your piece. So I've just got that little pale pink line going around there, which is enough just for me to be able to see that. So that's the inner ear. So once we've got to that stage, then we're just going to use our scissors, and I'm going to cut out on the drawn line here because that is my cutting outline, because I know that I've added the seam allowance onto these pattern pieces, and I've made a note on my pattern pieces so that I always remember when I come back to use this again in the future. So just make sure you follow that as well as possible. And then we've got our first piece cut out. Scraps can just go over to one side for now. So what I generally do is keep my pattern piece with my cut out piece of fabric for now, and just start to make a bit of a pile of them so that we can see where we are. The next thing that we're going to work with is going to be, well, what should we work with next? Let's work with the fur. So we now need to just work out which bits are in felt and which bits are in fur. So that's in fur, and the side bit's in fur, and that's it. Okay, so you need your side head piece, which is the piece like this shape, and you need this piece here, but you also need your ear as well for the outer of the ear. So we've got our piece of fabric just here. Just have a little look and see if there's what's called a nap. Sometimes when you have fur, some going down one way is nice and smooth, and if you go the other way it kind of ruckles up the fur. So just decide which way you want your fur to go, because that is going to kind of alter the way that your fabric looks. Sometimes with the fur you're better off doing it singly. Always work on the reverse of fur, and you can often get your pieces in a little more easily when it's on a single, but you've got to remember that you have to have your two pieces. So in this case here we've got, we only need to cut one of the fur. So the two little ears will go down here, which is fine, and we've got plenty of fur to work with. So you have got some choices as to which way that fur is going to go. So once you've got your pieces on here, on the pieces that are symmetrical, so if they're both the same left and right, that's fine. On this one we've only got one to cut, so we're going to pop that onto the edge here, and then I'm just going to use my pencil as much as I can. Will this chalk will work, or will it not? Sometimes this the fabric note's not going to work with that one. I'm going to have to use the heat erasable pen. So holding that down, now I can just make my marks, because this fabric doesn't like the chalk working on it very well. So again, just work in little sections going backwards and forwards, and you can always lift it and just make sure you can see the edge. You've just got to be careful that you don't move your fabric piece or your pattern piece as you're working with it. So again, all the way around, making sure, can you see how I've twisted off that pattern piece just there? So let's just straighten that back up again before I start doing this side. Let's use the bowed noise. And then we're going to do the same with the ears down here. So again, we can take that right up to the edge. So you're just going to put each of the pieces on. Now, the shapes that I'm using first are all symmetrical. They're the same. If I folded that piece down the centre, it would be the same on the left and the right. But when you're working with this one, you'll notice that there's a note on it that says 1 in reverse. So when we're cutting this one out, we need one to be cut out this way round with the writing side up, but then we need to cut the other one out with the non-pattern side up, with the other side up, and that will give us a left and a right to our character. If you only do 2 that way, or you do 2 this way, you'll end up with 2 left or 2 right, because you need to have the left and a right with the furry side of your fabric. It's called mirroring, and there is a video on my channel again about mirroring pattern pieces and how that is. So if you just make sure that you take a note of the instruction 1 in reverse, and we're going to cut out one this way, and then we're going to turn it over and cut out and draw around one this way as well. And there might even be room for an ear in the middle of there as well to cut out. Again, just trying to make the most of our fabric, but it, you know, if you're only making this project once, then it doesn't matter so much. You've still got plenty to be using. Okay, so I've just finished marking out my fur. Hopefully you can see that here. I've got my long head gusset there, and we only need one of those, so that's there. I've then got one ear here, two, and then I've got my left and my right head pieces either side of this ear just here. Now, the other thing that you need to make sure is that when you're working with a character like this, you want to work from north to south on the face. So if we imagine that her little forehead is north and that her chin is south, then you want to have your fabric pieces all laying in that direction. So on the ears especially, you don't want to be cutting out some this way round and then some that way round. You want to have them all the same direction. And I've cut too many ears out, haven't I? We only need 2 of those, don't we? And I've gone and done 4. So ignore that for the moment. It's heat erasable pen. I can take that off. I've just realised. So we just need the 2 ears, the left and the right of the head, and you can see how those are mirrored now, can't you, with that pointy bit coming into the middle, and then the front gusset of the head. And again, that fur's all going sort of so going down from north to south. Also, when you cut out fur as well, you need to take it very steady as well, because you've got this overhang of this pile on the edge of your fabric, look. And the way that we do that is we work from the mesh side again, where we've started this out. And what you use is some sharp little scissors. So I use these little embroidery scissors. And what you're going to do is you're going to part through the fibres of the fur, and you're just going to use the point of the scissors to cut through the point of the fur, because then when you do that, you sort of keep the pile of the fur intact as you're sewing, and you get that little overhang that you want. So again, just take that very steadily and just smooth your scissors through the fur, so that the top of the blade is almost just only underneath the top of that mesh back to the fur, and then you cut. And then when you part it, you can see you've got your overhang of fur. If you cut straight across, sometimes you need this fur for the detail, especially if you were making, say, like the Highland cows or the lion. You need to have this overhang of fur, because that will hide your stitches when you're sewing that on. So you do need to just be aware of how you're cutting the fur. And again, there is a video on my channel that goes into greater detail about how to cut out the fur, so that you keep hold of that pile in place. It's a slow process, but it doesn't take that long to do, but it does just mean that you'll get the best out of your fur and keep that dramatic effect that you love. A couple of stitches there or not. So there's one of our ears all cut out, ready for sewing. And you see the fur is going down on the pile. I've not got it going the other way. Okay, so let me carry on with the others. I'm going to cut them all out the same way, and then we will then talk about how to work with the felt. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pieces that I've already cut out, and I'm just going to draw around them on my interfacing, and then I am going to cut these out. So I'm just going to use my heat erasable pen, and I'm literally going to draw around these and cut these out, and then I will show you how to adhere this interfacing onto the back of the pattern pieces. Because the other thing is that if you've not worked with interfacing before, then you may not realise how it can be used in order to take the stretch out of the fur for you, so that it doesn't distort what you're actually cutting out, so, and what you're sewing and using for your head. So it's only going on the back of the fur, not on the back of the felt at all. And you'll need to remember to do a left and a right. You need to mirror your front pieces like this again, like we spoke about before. So you've got a left and a right. So have one with the writing side up and one with the the other side of the non-writing side up of your pattern. And then, I don't know if you've got room to do the 2 ears or not, but if we have, then I am going to do, don't need to do the front side of the head because that's in felt, so it's only the fur pieces that we need to do. I've got little, yeah, we can fit 2 ears in here, can't we, pretty much? Okay, I'm just going to just here. So draw around as best as you can all of your pattern pieces for your piece, your fur pieces. So you should have 2 ears, a left and a right front of your head, and then your back piece. Then just cut these out and meet me back here. Okay, so when you've cut all those out, just make sure you get all of these little scraps out of the way. You can save some of these, they are useful, just put them in a freezer bag just to save those little pieces separate from your other scraps, but they are useful to keep. Now I've got all of my pieces here, and you'll notice that the interfacing is like this, like kind of mesh. It's sort of transparent, it doesn't feel like a proper fabric, but there's a smooth side, but then on the other side there, I don't know if you can see, there's a slight sheen, but there's little bubbles on that side, and those little bubbles are actually glue, so you'll feel those when you are working with it. I always draw on the smooth side because the other side, the side that goes down, is the side with the glue on, and you'll see here we've got the pieces that we need. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is take my pieces of ear and fabric that we've got for our head. So here's a piece of ear, and I'm going to put that with the fur side down onto the work surface. Perhaps it goes that way, I'll have to just check. And then we're going to put the bobbly side down onto the top of the fur fabric to make the ear. Again, bobble side goes down onto the fabric. And you'll see I've got a left and a right, so again we can then make sure that we put the bobble side onto the right one. If you by any chance sort of try and iron this with the bobble side up, facing upwards, you're going to stick the glue to the bottom of your iron, and it really is a nuisance to get off, so you really don't want to do that. There's the other one there, look, these should fit exactly. And if you pull your fur to match your interfacing, don't pull the interfacing to match the fur, because the interfacing hasn't got so much of a give in it, and therefore that's more likely to be the correct size and shape that you need than your actual fur is. So here I can see that's a little bit longer, so I'm just going to use my fingers just to move that up a bit, just to make sure that that's all how it should be. So now I've got my fur underneath, I've got my interfacing on the top, and I've got the knobbly side, the rough side of the interfacing down onto the wrong side of my fabric. Now I'm going to take a press cloth, which I use this silk organza, because you can see through it, so you can see exactly where you're doing. You can buy silk, it is real silk, you can buy silk organza, it's not horrendously expensive, and you only need a section at a time, so you can you can make good use out of it and get several out of a metre piece if you buy it by the metre. But if you've not got one of these, you could use a tea towel, or you could use a spare piece of cotton fabric, or the other thing that makes really good press cloths if you've not got silk organza is actually the fabric handkerchiefs that you get, either men's or ladies. They're really good because they're a really fine cotton lawn, so they're really good for using. So the next thing I'm going to do is just lay my press cloth over the top of my fabric there and my interfacing, and I've got my little mini iron, and I've got it just off the maximum heat. We don't want it too high, and I have got the steam turned on, and we're going to press. So we're going to put our steam iron down for a few seconds at a time in one place. Now the press cloth will take out the ferocity of the heat from the iron, in order that the glue will melt on the underside of that interfacing and stick to the wrong side of that pattern piece. Now if I show you on this one here, let's just leave that iron just there for a second and peel that off, then you'll see that that's now stuck onto there. So if I just take this piece of interfacing off, can you remember how when I showed you earlier we'd got some stretching going on, look, side to side, that really stretchy fabric? If I now pull this across the same way, there's no stretch to that at all. So any stretch has been taken out of that fabric by the interfacing being stuck onto it. And that's what we're doing. We're taking away the ability, we want the texture of the fur for our character, but we don't want that stretchiness that we've got on that fabric, because as we stuff that head, it's going to stretch and distort. So that's why we want to sort of anchor that size down, that fabric down, so that it's not going to stretch. So again, we're using a pressing motion rather than a ironing motion. So we're up and down with the iron with the steam on, and you want to give it a few seconds for that glue to melt, and then we can move on to the next pieces as well. And that's just going to keep all of those pieces in the original intended shape for you, so that it's easier for you to be able to work with. You don't need to do this on all faux fur, it just depends, but this is definitely in the instructions. And as I say, you can either cut them out separately like this after you cut out your pattern pieces, or you can stick the interfacing to the back of your main piece of fur fabric. But it is slightly more difficult then, I think, to make sure that you've got enough interfacing, but you might have some in your stash that you can use. If you use dressmaking at all, then you can use it. But I just wanted to show you how this worked in case you've never worked with interfacing before, and if this is the first time making a character or doing any dressmaking of any kind, then that's very, very possibly true. So once that's all been adhered on, just make sure you give it a good old press, and we can peel back the press cloth. You can see sometimes it gets a little bit caught to press cloth, and then, as I say, now this has got no stretch in it at all, and we can just fluff up the fur on the other side when we're making our characters, and that'll still, so we've not lost the pile on that fabric at all, it's still there. Okay, so here we've got our two head pieces, and here you can see exactly what I mean with those mirroring pieces. We've got the curvy edge and the points together. If I'd have cut two out the same side, I'd have had two with the first side up this way round, and that wouldn't have been right, because you need to have that where the points are going together in order for that to be right. So we've got our two ears cut out, so let's put those with our other ear and put our pattern piece on top. We've got our left and our right of our head piece, so let's put that with the pattern piece on top, just in there. And then we've got the head gusset there, just the one of that, and put that on there. Okay, so bits of fur out of the way, because it does tend to shed, and if you've got asthma, just be careful, because obviously they do, the little fibres from the fur can sometimes aggravate your airways. So then we're going to be working with our felt. We've got a lovely big piece of felt here. I think what I'm going to do first is just going to press my felt first and use plenty of steam, and that will just make sure that all of these creases come out of it. So let me just go and do that, and I'll pop back to you. If yours is creased like this as well, then I'd suggest you do that, because it's much easier to press these creases out whilst the fabric's flat than it is if it's already on your character and it's sort of is showing a bit more then. Okay, so the next thing that I've done is I've ironed this piece of felt now, and I've folded it over on one end so that it's double. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do a slightly different way of marking this felt out. If you remember, on the leg and on the body and on the arms, then I didn't add any seam allowance to the outside edge. This has been cut exactly the same as the pattern. The only edge that I added a 1/4 inch seam allowance was down the bottom here, which we're going to leave open for the sole, and I'll show you why we're going to do that next. Well, later in the video I will do, but for now we just need to know that that's got that seam allowance added on there. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to get a layout that we can use the most of our fabric, but we don't skimp as well, because we've got to allow at least 1/2 inch between two pieces of pattern, in order that we've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both. So 1/4 inch gives us 1/2 inch difference in the middle. So the first thing that I've done is I've just kind of mapped this out quickly, and I've worked out that I can get one leg on this side here, making sure that we've got the seam allowance on the edges on the bottom here. I'm then going to flip that over this way so that we've got another one over here. And then I'm also going to use the flatter portion of the back piece here against the bottom down here, again making sure 1/4 inch from my edges, and then my two arms will fit in this way as well. So let's go ahead and just start to mark that out. So let's put this upside down this way round. As long as we've got that straight edge there, we should be fine. And I'm going to use my heat erasable pen because this will be in the seam allowance, so we should be fine. So let's take this one up here, and I've overlapped here about 10 inches. Yeah, just 10 inches, which is about 25.5 centimetres. That's what I've done there, just in case you wanted to do something similar and sort of follow my layout. So I'm making sure I've got a little bit excess of the fabric here where the fold is. It's flush at this side, and fabric isn't always cut straight, so that's fine. We can work around that. But you just need to be aware, I can't take it up to the edge of this top layer because can you see how it overhangs? That top layer overhangs the bottom. So I've just got to keep an eye on my underneath layer to make sure that we've got at least that 1/4 inch. The good news with felt is that you can place your pattern pieces any way round you want, any combination of a twist, because there's no grain in felt, and so you can just use it any which way you want. And we'll talk about grain in more detail when we're getting onto the clothes. So for now you can just know that with felt you don't need to worry too much. So we're just gonna, this is on the double, and I'm going to be cutting out 2 of the legs, 2 of the arms and 1 of the body. So let's just cut that round that, and then we can turn this round, and we're going to do one on this side as well. Now see how I was butting it straight up to the line? We can't do that. If you need to, you can use a seam gauge, which is like this. So this is a little metal measuring, and we're going to make sure that we've got at least 1/2 inch between any cut points on here. So at the bottom there where it's going to touch, and at the top here we're slightly short on the top there, so I'm just going to swing this top piece out until we've got at least 1/2 inch there as well. And there we go. And then at the bottom as well, I just need to go slightly up because I'm a bit short on the bottom here, if you see, because we've gone at a slight angle. So just double check anytime you move it, just double check again just to make sure that you've got your 1/2 inch. And then we should be about right, and then you're just going to hold these down whilst we just draw around these. Okay, so let's just draw around this one as well, holding it steady on the felt. Make sure your pen doesn't go underneath the pattern because we want it to be, both legs to be exactly the same size. So that's the second one, so 1 and 2. And because these are going to be inside out and both sides of the fabric are the same, we don't need to worry about doing that left and that right, but we'll keep those together at the moment, those mirror copies. And then on the body, I'm going to again use I need 1/2 inch from this side here, which is about there, and I need 1/4 inch from the cut edge there, and we need 1/4 inch from the bottom to make sure that that's all right. We'll be about there. So let's just draw around our body. And on our body, we've got 2 little marks that we just need to make sure we've got those marked on as well. 2 little dashes. So just lift up the pattern slightly and just mark that on. It's those 2 little bits there, which is the opening for where we're going to stuff our character. So that's the body done. And then on the arms, again, we're going to just put these in place, and we just double check that measurement all the time to make sure we've got 1/2 inch between the 2. And I can just angle this one down slightly just to make that work slightly better. A little bit more coming out. That's there. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, then just draw around this one. This is where the cardboard helps. If you just traced it off and you didn't use cardboard, then you just pin your paper pattern onto your felt, and you'd just be using it straight the way that it is, however it is there. So let's just do 1/2 inch now between this last pattern piece. Make sure we've got enough there, and to the edge. Only 1/4 inch to that edge, but we've got that there as well. So now I'm just going to just draw around this one as well. And once we've got that together, the first thing that I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to pin these fabric pieces together inside the actual shapes themselves. So you just need 2 or 3 pins just so that these edges don't move on you whilst you're sewing it and cutting it round, because we're going to sew this whilst it's in one piece of fabric, which is different to how I've told you to do it before, because normally we'd add 1/4 inch seam allowance onto each of these pattern pieces as well, and then we would then cut them all out individually and then would then sew them together. But this is a different way that I learnt when I was on a workshop with Claire from Lilly Rose Dolls, and I believe this is how she does hers as well. And we can't do the head this way because the head is made up of some different pieces, but anything that's just a flat shape on top of each other, so they're like the two legs, the two arms and the body, then we can do that. And I'm just going to use my scissors and I'm just going to take off this felt here, just in the excess that we don't need to have for the moment. So that's our shapes there. Hopefully you can see those shapes on there and that the pins are holding inside. These extra spaces here, we'll save those for little offcuts for a future project, but we've done the arms, done the body for now. I'm just going to put those to one side along with our piece of felt, and then let's get to have a look at our head pieces here and our feet pieces. So we need the front head, the sole, and we need this little nose, this head bit, which is the nose bit, which is this funny shaped piece here. And we need to cut 2 of each of these, apart from this one, which is cut 1. So the first thing I do is sort of find somewhere where we can put this on and draw around it. So we're trying to use as little felt as possible, and with felt you can go right up to the edges, which is great. And I have added the seam allowance onto these 3 pieces, so I can just, the line I'm drawing now is the outer edge. So that's one just there. You can get 2 soles in just here. Just draw that around there. I do like to save the fabric if I can do, because I think we spend so much money on it, don't we, when we're buying these things. But also it's just trying to get that balance between not, what's the phrase that they say, not spoiling the boat for a halfpenny worth of tar. Just means that don't try and cut it so slim that you spoil your finished character. And then we can get one piece along here, look, and then I'll be able to get the other piece the other direction. So I'm just drawing around these again with the heat erasable pen. That will just iron straight off. And then we can find another shape here just to fit in here. Let's have a look and see how we get this one to go in here. A bit like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? So as when we're working with the felt, with the fur, we had to make sure that everything went the same direction. With felt, you don't need to do that. And as I say, you can just work around it in the manner that it'll fit on the fabric best. And then once you've got all of those done, we're going to cut these out onto the drawn line and we will be all good to go. You need to be as accurate as you can with your tracing and with your cutting, because that's going to make all the difference to your finished character and whether it's lopsided or not. So there, where I've just left a little bit of extra on, I'm just going to go back and just take that off and just smooth that nose round as well. Okay, so we've got a nice edge there, so that's that piece there. So again, put your fabric pieces with your pattern pieces in order that you can then move on, and I'll just cut these out and then I will come back to you and we'll be talking about the next stage. So once you've got everything ready, we've still got our body and our legs in one piece of felt. Don't worry about that. So legs, body and arms are all on one piece of felt, all marked up and pinned. That's exactly as I want it to be. But before we sort of finish off the cutting out stage, this is where I wanted you to be. With these items marked out onto your felt and then pinned in the middle of each limb and the body, but then we've also got the bits that make up our head. So we've got our nose section there, we've got our 2 side heads in felt, we've got the 2 soles of the feet in felt, we've got the 4 ears, 2 in the ditzy fabric and 2 in the faux fur, and we've got 2 of the side heads, a left and a right, on the faux fur, so that those are ready to go. And then we've got our head gusset as well, which is the final part of that. Now, just a word on scraps. I mean, it depends on yourself as to what you want to do. I mean, these little scraps can come in really helpful for any embroidery or for any wool applique that you might want to do in the future. And there's a few, as a wool applique cushion, and these little flowers would make some lovely little hydrangea heads, little petals. So again, I am quite skimpy with my fabric and my spares scraps of fabric, because I do think they can come in handy. But obviously, you know what you want to save and what you don't. But just have that ready. Okay, and keep those to one side. And we've got a fair amount of felt left as well, which is great, just to have that amount of spare there, just to be able to be a bit of a stash builder, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put all of the things for the head to one side, because I'm actually going to work on the body and the limbs first. And this is something that I tend to do because I think that if I do the head first, then I want to put that onto a body and sew that complete. Whereas if I've already got my body and my limbs ready and I do the head, we're ready to move on to that next stage. So this is the method in my madness, if you like, as to the way that I think about it. So I'm going to keep all of my head things together. I've got my scraps all out of the way there, and I've got my pattern pieces here. So the pattern pieces for the limbs that I finish with will go straight into my box again and save those for another time. Sometimes I put those into a freezer bag as well first, which works really well just to keep everything together. But obviously you know how you like to work. But organisation, I do think is key in this kind of situation. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to our sewing machine, because we're going to now sew around all of these. The only thing that I want you to be aware of is that we don't sew this bottom line on the foot. So where get my pattern piece out of here for you. So where we left that 1/4 inch down the bottom here, we're going to leave this section open. And what I'll do is sometimes I'll do what's called a red pin trick. And I'll take a pin and I'll take it and I will just put a pin over the edge of that bottom section there, just like this. Let me show you. So there we've got the bottom of the foot. I've got the pin holding the fabric together, but here and here I've got a pin that's going through that seam there, and that's to remind me that I want to start and stop at this section down the bottom here. So let's do that on the other one as well, and the idea is that when I see the red pin, I know that it means something and I have to stop stitching, and that will just stop us on that point. On the body we can do the same thing, because where we've got our little dashes, we actually want to keep that open as well, because that's where we're going to actually put the stuffing into our character. So again, I've got 2 pins there just on those 2 notches, just to hold that section and just to remind me that I don't need to do that. But round the arms, we're going to sew that all the way around completely, and then we're going to separate these out afterwards. So let's move on to our machine. So you just need a basic stitch on this machine, which is great. And I'm going to take the stitch length slightly smaller because we're going to be stuffing this. So if your stitch length is normally 2.5 or 2.2, I'm going to take that down to a 2. So let's go down onto that. The other thing that I also do is I also like to move my needle when I'm working as well. You can't see very well, sorry, can you? Let me just move my machine slightly. So if you watch on the needle just here, you can actually move the needle either across to the left or to the right. And I can do that with mine here. So the position 0 is right over to the left. 3.5 is right in the middle, which is that position there. And then I can also move across to position number 7, which across here, which gives me the narrowest or the most of the presser foot on the felt. And the reason why that is important is because when you've got this amount of, let me just get my pointy tool. When you've got this amount of free space to run with, it can be difficult to keep everything straight. But if we move the needle right across into that left position and we keep the line of our felt just right, only visible on that left-hand side, we'll get a much nicer, neater, consistent finish. This is my theory anyway. Try it and see. Try sewing one arm with your needle in position 3.5 in the middle of that open plate there, and see how you feel your accuracy is. And then just sew the next one with the needle across to the left, as I'm going to be doing. So let me just move that across. I want to be on stitch. Yeah, that's fine. And that will then give me the length that I want and the position that I want for stitching. I've also got a polyester thread in here. Obviously you can use whichever thread you want, but I find that the polyester, I use a moon thread and that works really well. Gutterman's another really good one as well, and you might have a brand that you like. The only thing that I am a little bit sort of careful about is my needles, and I do like to use a Schmetz needle. So let me just find that one for you and just show you what the Schmetz needles are, just in case you're not aware of these. So I actually use a Schmetz Microtex needle, and I find that they work really, really well. It's got a lovely sharp point, and 90% of my sewing will be with this Schmetz Microtex. You can just buy these online or from your local needle workshop. And this size here that I've got in at the moment is an 80, but a 70 would work equally well because the felt is fairly easy to get your needle through, so you don't need to worry. So 70 or 80 on those is fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find a starting point. I'm going to start on this foot here and then move across. And I'm going to take out my first red pin because that's reminded me where I need to start and that I don't need to go across the sole of the foot. And I'm going to position my line so that it's just visible on the left-hand side of the presser foot. So it's inside that oval in the middle, but it's just visible. I've got my threads to the back, and I'm going to just take a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, just to lock that thread off. When I've done that, I've then got a button on my machine, which is a needle down, and when I press it, it puts the needle into my work, and I'll always then finish. When I finish sewing, my needle will always finish in the work. It's on most computerized machines, but if you've got a more heavy-duty manual machine, it won't be a feature that's on there. And in which case, all you need to do, if I just tilt the camera up slightly, is use your hand crank on the side here of your machine. And you just use that to lower and lift your needle, and then always stop with your needle in the work, because what happens then is you can do something called pivoting, and that is where your needle's in the work holding your fabric down. You can lift up your presser foot and then you can move your fabric around anywhere you like, and that's tethered down in that position, so you're never going to get a jig in your stitching. It's always going to be nice and smooth. So whenever you stop, you're going to stop like that, and we use pivoting quite a lot because of these shapes, but you'll see that as we get going. So we've done our forward and back, we've got our needle in our work. So now I'm just going to take my time and sew around my curved edges with my eye on the line, and I'm sewing on the actual line here. If I have to stop and change position, I can stop with my needle in the work, lift up my presser foot and just change the direction in order that we're not tugging on this fabric, this felt, too much. We want to have it a lovely smooth line that we're sewing to. So just go as fast or as slow as you're comfortable with. There's no points here for going super speedy, and actually you're better off to go slower and then not have to unpick than you are going too fast, is what I've found in my experience. Just keep that line nice on that edge. Going to go around the top, just around here. Everything's going to get pushed off my sewing table. I'll just move that out of the way. So let's just start to move round. So as soon as I feel like I'm having to start to pull on the fabric, let's just lift up that presser foot, even if it's just a little bit, to release the tension, and just change the direction just slightly. You'll find this much easier than trying to yank your fabric around. Give you a much smoother line. Trying to keep to that line as much as you can do. And then we've got a red pin down here which is telling me that I need to stop shortly, and I need to stop at the bottom of the heel. So at the bottom here I'm just going to reverse again and take the needle out of the work, and then we can use your scissors or your snips then just to snip your threads off, starting and stopping. Tidy up as we go along, and that makes it easier as we've worked on it. And then there you can see I've hit the line most of the way around, quite happy with that. And in the areas I have, I'm just by about 1 millimetre. I'm not going to worry too much about that. Once I've done that piece, I'm going to take the pins out of that, and then I'm now going to just move on to my next body part. So I'm not cutting this out yet, I'm just going to leave it in one piece. So again, onto the bottom of this toe here, let's put our needle in right on that point of that toe, few stitches forward, few stitches back, and then needle in the work, and we can carry this around again just as we have done with the other ones. finished that one, so let's just take those starting and finishing stitches off. Just take those threads off, and then we can take again the pins out of the middle because we've now finished that one, and the stitches are actually holding that in place now. So that's all done. So let's just go ahead and do the same thing for the body and also for the two arms, and then I'll meet you back here when we go to separate these pieces of limbs away from each other. Okay, so once we've been around all of our lines and stitched those, and you can see on the back there we've got all of our stitch lines, we're then going to take our scissors. Now the best ones that you can actually use are some pinking shears, which are these ones with these triangular blades. And what we do is we're going to cut right in between, so we halve that seam allowance between each of the pieces, and we're going to give it about 1/4 inch seam allowance, as closely as we can do all the way around. Now just remember that you need to be on the line on the bottom of these feet as well, because we have added that 1/4 inch seam allowance on there. Try not to get too close because you need to be able to stuff these quite well and firmly in order for the character to stand nicely. So you will need to just bear that in mind with your edges. And the little triangles do help the fabric to turn through nicely as well. So let me just do this on the bottom here as well. Okay, so that's the first leg cut out, and that's what it's going to look like when you've done that. We're just going to work our way through each of these pieces and just cut them out. So just on the bottom of the foot we just cut it really close to the drawn edge, but then everywhere else we're going to give it that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just make sure you don't go too generous on one piece and then skimp on another, because you measured that 1/4 inch when you were laying them out, and you've got to stick to that when you're cutting them out, just to get the best results. You'll soon get the hang of it. It feels a bit nervous when you're doing this for the very first time, but you'll soon be making more of these characters because they are just absolutely adorable. So you will end up making more, I'm sure. Just the way they come together and their little characters as well is just really magical. So again, just cutting through around all of these just to get that nice and neatly around. And I know that we've not left a gap on the arms. That is deliberate at this moment in time. I'll show you how we sort out to stuff the arms in a few moments, because we're going to be doing those in a minute. Well, we'll do the feet first, and then we'll move on to the arms, I think. You'll work out your own way that you like to do it, but this is the way I like to do my limbs first and then my body, because then once I've got my body sewn, I want to be putting it all together. So I'm a little bit impatient like that. So if I've got my limbs all ready, I'm not having to put my body to one side. I can start attaching things to it straight away then. Let's just keep going around here and you'll see it's quite quick. So all of these scraps here I will save. Obviously something a little bit too thin and I won't, but I do tend to save most of my scraps, because you can either use them as stuffing inside your character, because obviously it's soft and you can use that in with that, and that makes it a bit zero waste, or you can actually use them for other projects, as I said before. Okay, so we've got our body and we've got our little gap left between our notches to be able to turn that through. So we've got that ready. We have two arms here, and if you just look at your arms, you should have a left and a right to those, and you'll find that one end is slightly more rounded than the other. So you've just got to work out which way round you want that to be. So mine are probably that way round, so that's fine. And then we've got two legs, and again from this point forward we try to sort of keep an eye that we've got a left and a right. So we've not got two lefts or two rights, we've got a left and a right, and that will then help us when we're going forward. So the next stage then that we're going to do is, first let's do the soles of these shoes, of these feet. So once I've got the pattern for the feet, I'm going to put my sole pattern into the box there. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my sole in half. So do it in half long ways so that it fits on perfectly. And then we're going to get our pins and we're going to put a pin on the folded edge. So one pin just there, stick it with the head sticking out, and then one pin just here with the head sticking out. So that's looking like that. And then fold those, so those two pins are now on top of each other. And then at these quarter points, I want you to put a pin as well. One just there, and then another one just here. I'll just show you on one, but you will be repeating this on both of them. Just put our arms and our body out of the way for the moment, and the other sole and the foot. So then, because this is a symmetrical shape, what we're going to do now is we haven't turned the leg the other way around, we still can see our seam. We're going to just open up the foot, and then we're going to put the first pin of one of the long edges against this top edge here. We're just going to open that out and stick our pin in just to hold that in place, so it's holding it onto the foot. So I've opened up the seam allowance on the toe there, and where that pin was is in line with that seam. Let's go to the back edge here. Open up your seam allowance with your fingers, and then where that pin is, that pin goes onto the stitch line. And then you're going to just take the pin out and then just reposition it through both layers of felt. Okay. And then we can then see where the quarter of the pin is on the mark. Just sort of flatten your felt out, and that should hold that in place for you. And then over to the other side, and then your felt you should just be able to tuck in the little curved edge of your sole, and it should fit against the bottom plate of your foot there quite nicely. And then let's put that one in as well. I like to get those 4 pins in first, as you can see, if you can see with the light. So that those are held, and then what I do is something called split the difference. So I won't start working from one edge and move all the felt across to one edge. I'll go into the middle and I'll have a look and I'll see, okay, we've got one bumpy edge here and a smooth edge there. So I just make it so that both sides are as bumpy as each other on before and after the pins, and then I put one in the middle. And then I do the same again with where I've just been and put a pin in the middle. And putting these soles in is probably one of the little trickier parts of these dolls, really. There's not too much. Little noses are tricky, but then this bit is also. But if you follow these tips, this will make it much easier. So again, we're going to just push the sole down so that the fabric is going down into that foot. And again, in the middle there, one pin in there. Oops, give the pin a twist if it won't go through your felt first time. And then onto the edge just here. And then onto the edge just here. And what you're trying to achieve is that the circle of your foot plate here fits in without any puckers in your felt, and then when you turn it over, there's no puckers in your felt on the top either, on that top edge where we're going to sew. So let's go over to the other side again. And now the other thing I'm going to say as well is let's tack these as well, because taking a couple of minutes just to tack will just guarantee a better rate of success than trying to navigate all of these pins, especially if you're sewing with a child or if you're a beginner. It can be a bit daunting to get pricked with all the pins at the time. So just manipulate your felt down, put all your pins in till you've got a nice circle going here, and you'll have this sunflower of pins all the way around. But when you look at it, that foot plate is completely flat. Yep, no puckers in that. And again, the felt on the outside is no puckers. Now, if you are an experienced sewist, you could start at one edge and sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance and finish at the toe. I would then break off your fabric, your thread, and then start again and do the other section. That's the way I found it best to do these. But if not, if you're not an experienced sewist, then I would suggest to you that at this stage you get a needle and thread. Let me just get some different coloured thread that you'll be able to see. Which is this colour. And let's just thread a hand sewing needle, because then it means we don't have to navigate past all of the pins on the foot, and that will make it a much easier sew for us. Right, get this threaded. And then we're going to join this together. I have got the thread double, but not for any particular reason. As long as it's long enough to go around, you'll be fine. So let's just do a quick knot on the end there. Okay, So we've got a knot on our thread and my thread's double and I've got a hand sewing needle. It doesn't matter whereabouts you start or stop, but you're going to take a stitch just slightly more than 1/4 inch. And you're going to just do a little running stitch. Well, it doesn't have to be too little. You're just going to do a running stitch that's going to just join those 2 bits of felt together, just to hold it together. And you're going to get tangled up on your pins when you first start doing this, but it does get easier because as you've gone past a section, I would suggest you take your pins out as you go around, and that will make it easier. Oops. And this will just mean it's just easy. Now when you get to your seam allowance on the front or at the toe or at the heel, try and keep your fabric as flat as possible, and then you're going to go in one side of your seam allowance, and then you're going to take a stitch through from the sole and you're going to come out directly on the other side of that seam allowance to hold that really nice and flat. Take out some more pins as you go past them. And can you see the size of my stitches? They're quite big because they're tacking stitches, so they don't need to be little dainty ones. They've just got to hold this fabric together and do the job of the pins for you. Just try not to pull up on your thread to get any gathers in your thread. We're not trying to cinch this in at all, we're just trying to sew it flat. And if we go just slightly more than 1/4 inch, we hopefully won't sew over our tacking threads, and that hopefully will make it easier to remove those. So again, let me just take out some pins as we go. Just keep checking to make sure that you have not gathered this up at all. That's all fine. We're coming up to the next seam allowance. Look, so just make sure your fabric's all flat. And take a stitch up to the seam allowance, kind of jump past the seam allowance, going down the front of the leg, and then carry on past it. Then when we get to the starting point, we're just going to check to make sure we've not cinched in those stitches at all, and there's no puckers on the top at all, nothing on the bottom. And once we're happy with that, let's take our pins all out. Then I just do a double stitch, just a back stitch just in place there, just where we started and stopped. Oops. And take off, leaving a little bit of a tail. Okay, so this is what mine looks like now. So there we've got the length of our foot, and we've just been sewing in the foot plate along here. So nice and flat, as you can see there, which is going to give us a lovely effect. So that's all going to move out nicely. Once you've done that, and you can do both at the same time or you can do one at a time, it's up to you. We're then going to go back to our machine. We've still got our needle across to the left hand side, and we're still on a 2 stitch length, and I'm going to put this flat part here of the foot plate down against the plate of my sewing machine because that's easier. That's going to want to stay nice and flat, whereas this top section here, we can navigate that a little bit more as we're sewing. So I start at the toe, open up the seam allowance if you can, and you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance on around the foot. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle into the work so that we can pivot around this. And then we're going to just start sewing around. Just stop if you need to, just take a break or just reposition your felt as you need to. Just lift that presser foot up, because we've got the needle in the work, then we can lift that presser foot up just to be able to manipulate everything round. If you've got your seam allowance out flat and you're able to, you can carry on straight around, but it is a particular place where you might get a pucker in your sewing, so let's just see how we get on. I can always show you how to correct that if we need to. Make sure that plate is staying nice and flat for you at the bottom, that sole plate. all bunching up here again. Look, so I'm just going to stop, lift my needle up and just make sure. And if you can smooth the fabric with your finger underneath and that feels nice and smooth and no lumps and bumps, then 90% of the time you're going to be fine for carrying on sewing. So let's just reverse at the end. Take our needle out of the work. Take our finishing threads off and our stopping threads. And let's have a little look. So hopefully you can see my stitch line on there going round. And most of the way round I've managed to miss those gathering stitches. So let's just take those out now, those tacking stitches. I did just call them gathering stitches, I do apologise. I meant tacking stitches. Just gone over the knot threads slightly. Here's my quick unpick, that'll be easier to use, won't it? I'm just trying to lift up the edges of the tacking threads so that we can pull those out nice and neatly. So. And so if we have a look at that now, we've got our foot sewn in there, foot plate sewn in there nice and neatly, and there's no puckers in there at all. That's all nice and neat. You can see the little gathers where there's little stitches in, but that's all fine. There's just nothing actually folded in where there shouldn't be. That should be all nice and neat. And we're going to now just do the other one. So what I want you to do is to repeat the same with your foot pad for the other foot before you move on to anything else. So put the other one in exactly the same way. If you're not sure, just reverse the video, rewind the video, and then that'll bring you back to this part here where we're going to then move on to the next section. Okay, so the next thing that I want you to do once you've got both of your feet in here is I want you to lay them up on the table so you've got the toes touching like this, because this is going to give us a left and a right for where we've got to make some slits in the top here to be able to stuff them. So we've got our toes pointing to each other, and we're going to take our seam ripper. Now we've got to be really careful because we just want to put about an inch slit in the top here. That's all we need. And we want to be about an inch down from the top, but not any longer than that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the two pieces of felt together, so the front and the back to get apart from each other, so that we're only going to go through one piece of the felt. And you're going to very carefully put your seam ripper in the middle of the thigh, about an inch down, and you're just going to take a little snip, a little cut, because then you can then get the your snips in just through one layer. Again, make sure you're pulling them apart so that you're only going through one layer, and then you can elongate that to about an inch longer. That's all you need. You just want to go through one side of the fabric. So let's try that again. So again, we're going to do it on the top one here because the toes are together, so we're fine. So again, on the top here, we're going to pull this section apart. We're going to guess down about an inch and put the point of our seam ripper in just through the one layer and just give ourselves a little starting point, and then we can then put the nose of our scissors in, making sure we're only going through the one layer, and then we're just going to do a snip for about an inch, and that will give us these two sections here. So let's just put those to one side for now, because we're going to do the same with the arms. So let's have the arms, and one side of the arms is going to be slightly sort of rounder than the other, and we're going to put these again. So we've got two bananas, but we've not got them together like that so that they fit sort of almost perfectly. We've got them so they've got this oval in the middle here like that, and that'll give us a left and a right against the body. And again, we're going to just pull at the top here away, about an inch down, put the seam ripper in, and just start us off with a little cut, and then we can then just elongate that little cut by putting the nose of the scissors in the cut we've made with the seam ripper. Make sure you've got your two sides apart like this, so keep it out the way so you don't go through it accidentally. And then you can then just snip down about your inch. These little gaps do stretch slightly as you are filling them, so that's why we don't want to make them too big, because obviously then they're going to be more difficult then to sew up and make invisible. The way that we do this as well with the right and the left means that when we sew the body, this cut edge after we've sewn it together will go on the inside, so you'll have a nice neat edge on the outside. So that's the other reason why we're making sure we're doing a left and a right. So again, let's just do this one now. Pull this one apart, put our seam ripper in about an inch down, little cut, and then we can then elongate that into our inch long there. We don't need to do anything with the body at the moment because we've already got a hole in that for filling that, so that's fine. So then what we're going to do now, let's start with our body first, is we're just going to put our thumb inside and then hold it with our finger, and then we're going to push that bottom edge through. Grab hold of it, and then just very gently, because you try not to pop any stitches and you try not to stretch this opening any more than you need to, we're just going to turn this around so that the seam allowance will then be on the inside and we'll have a nice neat body. Just run your fingers along those edges, that seam, and that will just help that all pop out all just nice and neatly. And those little stitches do just mean that it helps to hold everything together in the right way. So there we go, that's nearly all out. You can just roll the edge at seams like this as well, and that just helps get them all out. Just make sure you've got clean fingers, because working with this white felt as well, it will pick up any marks, and you're wanting to try and keep it as neat as possible. So there we've got our body, and we've got our little gap there for filling it. So let's now go on to our arms. So let's find our little slit. And what I find best with these is we've got the slit down at the bottom, so we know which end we're going to start from this end. And if you pull the two sides apart like that, you can then tuck in the little part that's the hand. So tuck that in, and then you can, by pulling on the fabric either side as you go down, you can sort of tuck it in, and it'll go along as you make it. You might have what's called a turning tool. I think Prim do some turning tools, don't they? But also you might have something like this. It just adds 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And again, you can just use something like this. You can't see it very well because it's clear, but or the pen with the lid on it, and you can just then push it down, and then you want to push it towards your gap, and then you want to push it the felt through and out of your gap. And then at the bottom here, we can just turn that round again. They are a little bit just getting used to how you're doing these, but they do go round eventually. Or you can use a knitting needle as well, or a crochet hook is also quite a good tool as well for pushing these out, depending on what you've got at hand, or a chopstick. People have also used chopsticks before. This bit on the end here doesn't want to come out, so I'm just going to use a pin. Just dig into the section so that you want to kind of see your stitches on that edge, so that you know that you've got everything right out the full width. Because obviously if you don't turn it through the right way, then it's going to be slightly smaller than intended, and that will affect the fit of the clothes. So again, at this top, just give it a wiggle. And again, you can just go digging in for those, so that those stitches are on the edge there. You will possibly bend your pin, but that's just the way things go. Okay, and there we've got an arm. So we've got a body and an arm turned through. Turn your other arm through exactly the same way. And then on your feet, we're going to do the same thing. But on here, we're going to start at the toe. So again, we're going to just pull those sides apart, and we're going to just tuck that sole and that toe in. We're going to go up through the ankle. Just push that up and through. If you get it too bunched up, it's not going to go very well. So this is where the chopstick or the knitting needle just helps, just to wiggle that through and down. So, aim for your hole again, and just poke your foot out through your hole. Don't press too hard, because you don't want to come through your felt, because otherwise you'll be sewing another foot plate on, which will be slowing you down. But again, once we've got this foot through, we can just pull that through and just check that stitching we've got on the bottom here. Just look, you're looking for any puckers, and just making sure that everything's all sewn in lovely and neatly, and got a nice round base for your character to stand on. The smaller characters actually don't have this foot plate in, so if you're making a 16-inch character, then they don't, or a 10-inch character, they don't have those feet plate in them. It's just this larger 22-inch one that does. I'll just turn it round at the top. And there we go. Just give it a roll to make sure those stitches are right on the edge, and you've got a nice smooth leg. And there we go. Okay, so turn your other arm and your other leg round, and then meet me back here with your bag of stuffing, and we'll get stuffing these limbs. So we've got 2 arms turned, 2 legs turned, and the body at the moment. And what we're going to do now is we're going to stuff and close these. Before you start stuffing, I want you to make sure that you've got any pins that are lying about on your work surface out of the way, along with anything with any points or anything like that, because you'll be surprised how much stuffing goes inside these characters, and you don't want to accidentally scoop up a pin whilst you're handling your fibre fill and then have your character have a pin poke through it once you've got closed it all up, because that's really frustrating. So I use this fibre fill type stuffing here, which is used for upholstery and for pillows, and what I'm going to do is just take that and just start to push it inside my character, and as you can see it kind of expands and goes everywhere, but it will contract once it's inside the character. And this is why I say you don't want to be scooping up any pins or anything you don't want. I mean, especially when you're working with this white felt and fabric, you don't want to have any bits of black thread get caught up with your stuffing and then show through on your finished character. So another little thing to look out for as well. So just keep stuffing this in here, and you're going to be really surprised how much these characters do take in terms of their filling. That's what makes them so cute and cuddly though, so we don't want to skimp on it at all. And especially with the body, you know, the body's got to hold up the head and the structure of the whole frame of your character, so we do particularly want to make sure that we go in nice and firmly with the stuffing. The thing with felt is there is a little bit of give in the fabric, so if you do stuff it too heavily, you're going to stretch your character, and again that can affect the fit of the clothes. So you've just got to kind of gauge it as best as you can, really, to make sure that you're firm enough but that you've not stretched anything out of shape. So again, just make sure you get right into that bottom area and right down into the front of that tummy. So do that section first. Let's get some more. I'm going to start and stuff up into this head area, and the head area's got to support the whole, or the neck area's got to support the whole of the head. So again, that's got to be nice and firm too. Now it looks like I'm being quite rough, but it will take the roughness. Okay, so we're starting to get a nice shape, but I can feel there's still some softness here. So this is getting a bit better. So again, I want to just use my fingers and just push that firmness down and up into the neck as well. Let's get some more stuffing. And just keep on going. I hope that if this is your first character you've ever made, I hope you're enjoying the process. I know that at the moment it's hard to believe that these odd shaped bits of felt and little bits of stitching will come together, but you'll be surprised once it starts to form how attached you get to these characters. Certainly that's what's happened with me. And if you're enjoying this one, there are some videos where I've made Clara the cat, and I've also made Harvey the hedgehog as well. So there's a couple of other videos on there that you can, for Lilly Rose Dolls. And for each of those characters, I've got videos on how to make all of the clothes as well. So if you're new to clothes making, then that's they're really good videos for you to start with. The other good thing is that all of the skills that you learn when making their clothes are directly transferable to adult and children's clothing. So it's really a good way to start and a bit of an introduction into, you know, clothing construction if ever you feel like you might want to go that direction in the future. And if you don't, then that's fair enough, but it's always good to know that the skills are transferable. Okay, we're getting somewhere close, I think, now. Let me just tidy this up a little bit. So can you see how firm that is now? There's not too much give. It's a little bit just there. So let's just push some more into that tummy area. And that makes a bit more of a gap here, which we can then fill. And we want to make sure that neck area is nice and firm too. So So this probably will do me, I think. Just get all of this in and then we'll have a reassessment again and see where we are. Okay. Got some nice roundness going on for the chest and for the tummy, and this section here is for the bottom, and then we can pull out the edges of the white felt there just so that we can see that that's going to close nicely on the back there. So I'm happy. That's about how firm you want it, which is really quite firm in order to hold that together. And then once we've finished that, we've got this gap here and we're going to fill that with a ladder stitch. So let's just get my hand sewing needle and get some thread off the machine. I'm going to use the thread double on this. Let me just get my glasses. We'll thread our needle ready to close this up. Let's put the two ends of the thread together. And tie a knot in the end there. Okay. So whenever I'm sewing up the back of a character, you've got to imagine that you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance, which we've used before for the actual seam line that we've got at the that we've continued, and we're going to want to continue our stitching with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to do something called a ladder stitch, and I'll show you how to do that, but it's really quite a clever stitch to have, and it's really great for closing up these kind of areas where you want it almost invisible, although it is going to be covered with clothes, so don't worry too much if this is your first one. And it's definitely one of those stitches that you get neater with the more that you do, so don't beat yourself up too much if it's not as neat as you want straight away. So the first point I'm going to start is there's the edge of the machine stitch, and I'm going to come just a few millimetres in from the edge of the machine stitching. So there we go. It's quite neat, I think. A little bit of discoloration there, but I think that's from the iron on the marker pen, which will just iron out as well, so I can iron that bit out. But otherwise that's quite nice and neat, I think. So once you've done that, then we're going to do a couple more stitches coming back down the seam again. So sort of like to reinforce over that end. So I'm travelling back down where we've already sewn. That'll just reinforce it. And then once we've done that, we can take a little stitch through just a few threads, wrap our thread around 2 or 3 times, because that keeps the pressure off the knot. And if you look, I'm just pushing down with my thumb in order just to be able to get that needle to go in and then to come out again. So if I show you, that's the edge of the stitches for the machine stitching, and this is where my threads are coming out. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches just here just to anchor this knot in place. So again, just either side of that seam, a little bit of felt on either side, and then just take a stitch just across and in place, and that will just anchor that knot down so that we can then get started with our ladder stitch. Okay, so there we are. Okay, so you're going to kind of tuck the felt in as you, so the stuffing in as you go, and then because the thread has come out on this left hand side, we're going to go across onto the right hand side now, and we're going to take one stitch, so just like that, just through the felt only, and take it through. And it was just straddled across where that gap is. Now, kind of keeping an eye where your seam allowance is, and it's a bit difficult to see when you've got it on the white stuffing on the white felt, but you're just going to have to trust me. We're just going to come to the other side now and take a stitch through our felt, just on one side, and then we're going to go across to the other side, just a couple of millimetres in, and we're going to take another stitch through the felt on that side. You're trying to go through enough that you can get a good grip on that felt, but without sort of compromising. And we're going backwards and forwards across this gap in line with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oops. And I'll show you in a minute how these threads look once they're starting to go. So you're having to guesstimate where that 1/4 inch seam allowance is. So I keep moving it down so I can see. And then turn your character round, and then we're going to do one on the other side here as well. So if I put my finger behind there, you'll see the lines of the stitches going across. Hopefully that'll focus for you. Because then when you've done 4 or 5 stitches, you can pull on your thread and it will cinch it in and it will start to close the gap up. So I tend to do 4 or 5 stitches and then cinch it in, and I found that that's about the right ratio to be able to close the gap up. So just untuck your seam allowance so you can see where you're going with it, and just use your thumb just to sort of pull it in the felt as you need to, and just rotate your character body as you need to. And we're just going to do those stitches, doing them quite close together, but just one side of the, can you see, one side at a time. And again, we've got that little bridge of threads on there. And then when you've done 3 or 4 or 5 stitches, you can just pull, and if you watch, it just pulls that edge in nice and neatly. So the top 2 will just come undone again as you let go, but that's okay because you're still making progress in terms of closing up the gap. And just continue up here, trying to keep to that 1/4 inch seam allowance as you go. Oops, thread's got round the body. The good news is this is the only body part that you need to do the ladder stitch on, because the other ones we can just do a slip stitch to close the arms and legs, because we'll hide those against the body when we attach them. So this video for this character is going to be in several parts. So I'll do this first part, which is the cutting out and then making the body and the limbs, and then we'll do a separate part for the head, and then we'll move on to doing the clothes separately, because I think that's a nice natural break. So again, we've got another section of bridges of threads, and then if you watch that, as I just pull on that nice and gently, then it just all moves down. You can't do too many stitches because otherwise you're putting too much pressure on these top ones as you're closing it, and you'll get loops in your threads, and you don't want that. You want it to kind of be as invisible as possible, really, because although it's going to be hidden by the clothes, it is nice to have it as invisible as possible. So again, let's just cinch that in. As you get to the top, just poke your stuffing in so you've not got any coming out, and just use the tip of your needle just to ease your seam allowance out so you can see what you're working with. Excuse my big hands if they're in the way. It's hard to sometimes get the camera angle right so that I can see, but you can see too. But hopefully you've got enough of an idea of what's going on to see. Just make sure when you go into the top here that you just sort of keep everything tucked inside, so you've not got too much of a bump on the end there. You don't really want to have too much of a bump. And then we're going to go just a couple of stitches past the top of the seam, because that will also just help to take the pressure off the top of this thread here. Okay. Make sure the thread stays on. Hold your thread tight and push your needle through, and this will give you like a surgeon's knot. Oh, when it doesn't mess up like mine has just done. Oh goodness. Let me just undo it and start again. Just unwrap it if yours does the same thing. Right, let's just leave that as a stitch as it was. So things don't always go right for you, even if you're on camera. And I don't always edit these bits out because I think you need to know that this always happens for other people as well. So let's start again. So make sure your threads are nice and flat. Let's take a little stitch of the threads. Wrap around 1, 2, oops, that's coming undone. 1, 2, 3. Hold the threads tight on the needle, and then let's just push that through. And hopefully it'll go all the way through to the end and give us a nice neat knot. And then what I do is then I poke my needle in very close to the knot, but before I let go of the needle I want to see where it's coming out, because we want to make a nice long tail. So there I can see my needle coming out just there. So make sure you've got hold of that and then pull it through, because what that does, it gives you a nice long tail on your thread so that it's less likely to unravel. If you snip it off really close just here, then that could unravel quite easily, that knot. But if you've got a nice long tail, so come out anywhere on your body, just put some tension on your thread, and when you snip it, you'll see that the tension on the thread will pull the end back into the character like that, and then you can't see where that thread's come out at all. So because we're stuffing, let's move our needle out of the way. And there we've got a lovely stuffed body. So this is where we've sealed it up. That's the back, so that's the centre of the back, if you remember that, and that's how your character, this is the tummy, this is the chest, and that's the bottom, and that's where we've just sealed it up. So let's now go on to the next bit. Should we do a leg next? Let's get a leg. So let's get our stuffing. Now the important thing with doing the legs is you've got to get right down into the toes. And if you just keep on stuffing from the top and you don't push all the way down into the bottom as you're going, you will not be able to get the right tension in the right area. So put a bit of stuffing in like this first, and then using some sort of tool, or like I say, a knitting needle or a chopstick, you can then carefully just manipulate this stuffing down. So you want to manipulate it down and then across into the toe. So down and across first. And again, let's get this. And this inch gap is enough to stuff. You didn't need any more than that. As I say, sometimes they stretch a little bit, but if you've not gone too big to start off with, then you should be okay. And let's just push this down again. And then let's angle that across and into this toe, because we want that lovely, lovely rounded toe. And nice stable feet for Lillian to stand on and show off her beautiful dress. And bloomers to everybody. If you are enjoying sewing along with me today, then I'd really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to my channel. It's really lovely to know that you're here. And if you do find value in the videos, the Lilly Rose Dolls videos, or any of the others that I do, if you were able to take the time just to leave me a comment, that would be great. I've got a little feather there, we don't want feather in there. That would be really great. So that's also something that you can do. Which would help my channel immensely, because the more interaction there is, the more likes on the video, and the more the people comment on it, then YouTube will push my video out and suggest it to more people, which then helps support the channel and the videos that I make. So as I say, I hope you feel you're able to do that, which would be great. No pressure though, I promise. Okay, so let's keep stuffing these down. Again, you can see how much stuffing's going into these, which is quite a lot. And I think it's always sometimes good to see how long these things take in real time, because then you can, you know, if you're taking a long time with yours and you're thinking, oops, and you're thinking how much time you're taking, it can be easy to give yourself a hard time about that. But actually, that's just how long it takes. So while I'm stuffing this, we've had some really hot weather. It's actually August at the moment, and I don't know if people know or not, but I'm an English expat, but I live in southern Spain. And so at the moment, our temperatures outside are early 30s, which is really quite warm. So some days like this, you sort of hibernate inside, but with the aircon on. But that does make it quite a nice sewing day to have. So I'm still stuffing the feet. I've not started moving up yet to the ankles. So again, you're just putting in a bit at a time and just popping it down. So I don't know whereabouts in the world you're watching from. I've got quite a community of people from all over the world, I think, which I absolutely love. So yeah, if you want to tell me, take a minute just to tell me where you're watching from, that would be amazing too. Can you see how that's all just started, and how much rounder it all seems as well, from being quite thin. It just starts to take on a shape and a life of its own. Now just remember, there is a sew line, isn't there, on Lillian. So I think you've got a decision to make shortly as to whether you want your Lillian to sit down or whether you want her to stand up. My Lillian will probably stand up, I think. Will she? Because if you want her knees to bend, then I'll have a quick look in the instructions, but I think you need to. You see how that foot's standing already, look, with that lovely and still. So let's just keep this going in for the moment. We've not got to the point where a knee joint would be at the moment. Push that down, and having a blunt end helps much more than a point. If you've got a point on the end of whatever you're pushing down with, that you do run the risk of actually going through the side of your felt. Just have a quick look in my instructions on the legs, because I'm fairly certain. Right, okay. Yeah. So if you want your Lilly Rose doll, your character, to bend at the knee, where that sew line was marked, and you can get your pattern out and have a look, you're going to stuff to that point, and then you need to run a row of stitches across that joint to give it that ability to bend. I quite like the fact that mine will stand up, so I'm not going to do that on mine. But if you were doing that, you'd just carry on stuffing until you got to the point of that line, or approximately where that is. Stuff it sort of quite firmly down to the foot, because you can always ease the stuffing back up again towards your sew line. Keep it quite flat, and then just run a row of stitches backwards and forwards across there, either by hand or by machine, and that will then hold that, and then you'll carry on stuffing your leg in at the top. But for me, I want my character to stand up, so I'm just going to carry on with my stuffing as I have done on my other characters, without a break and without that sew line in. But it just depends what you want your character to do. Some people have got like a bookshelf or a shelf in a bedroom or something where they know they want their characters to stand. So it's just about planning that in advance. Just make sure you're getting the heel nicely filled out as well. Especially if your character is going to stand, then you need it to be. And make sure your toes are nicely packed out. You can just manipulate that stuffing into those toes if you need to, just to make sure that's all nice. Okay, so we're going to carry on, and every now and again I would just suggest you just keep trying your leg, just to make sure you're keeping that foot plate fairly flat, so that your leg will stand, because that will help you when you come into stand your character at the end. But we're going to just carry on stuffing now all the way up the ankle here and up the way to the top, in order that this leg will hold itself and will stand up. So let's do that, and then you can do the other one as well, and then I'll show you how to close this up. Your arms are very similar, so stuff right down into the hand as you're going, again with your blunt tool, with your to get your shape, and again then once you're ready to close this up, I'll show you how to close this up on one of those. But you're getting the gist as to what we need to do with the stuffing and how much it takes and how firm that needs to be as well. As you can see, that's really quite firm. Just make sure you've got your heel nicely stuffed and your toe, because that's all going to give you your shape for your character as well when you're wanting it to stand. Okay, I'll come back to you once I've got these towards the top, and then we'll seal this up. Okay, so we've sewn up the back one, as you know, and then I've just been stuffing and sewing up the legs, and I've just got this last one to do now. So I'll just do a slightly different stitch on the leg, which is an over stitch, which is one that you might be more familiar with. So again, I've got a double piece of hand sewing thread and a hand sewing needle, and I'm just going to go through the inside and come out just a couple of millimeters just below where the felt is. So there's the stuffing and there's the felt, and that just gives you something solid to take a couple of stitches on first before you then move further down the leg. So I've just taken a couple of stitches in place there just to anchor that knot so that it's not going to pull through. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to take a couple of a stitch either side again, but we're not going to be quite so sort of rigid, if you like, about the pulling it together, because we can actually go through from the inside and come out on this one, because it's going to be on the inside leg, so it doesn't need to be quite as neat. Obviously, if you still want to do the ladder stitch, you can do. And this one's still very similar, but we're just going from inside to get this crisscross effect on the threads, and we can still pull that in, It's just slightly easier stitch to do, as I say, because the way that we've cut these out now is so that we've got this seam is going to be on the inside of the legs when it goes against the body. So it's going to be hidden like that, so you won't really see that stitching. It just depends on how neat you want to be, but it's just a different way of closing just by taking that stitch. Just make sure that you've got your seam allowance folded out. You don't want to make your leg too thin and skinny at the top there, but you can still just keep going backwards and forwards across. The difference with the ladder stitch is you get that much neater finish. So if you look at the finish there, you don't see your stitches, whereas if I show you this one on here, you can see the stitches more. Does that make sense? I hope it does. But again, we just keep taking a stitch on here either side and just keep turning the leg round so that you can get access to where you need. Try not to take any more than your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just going all the way up, and then when you get so far, just cinch it in again. All the way up to the top, and then we'll do a few stitches in place just to anchor the top of that thread onto the felt so that you're away from the edge. Just keep tucking your stuffing in so that doesn't sort of poke out on you. And then we're going up near the top. You try not to get a little bubble at the top, so just keep sewing until you can neaten that off. And because we've not got the seam allowance here, you're trying to put the sort of like the raw edges together, I suppose, at the top here. Because where you've got, on the back here, you've got the seam allowance from both sides that you're sewing together. But here you've just got to cut. So it does give you a little indentation on the inside, but actually that sits quite nicely when you're going against the body. So it does work quite well this way. And when you get to the top, just do a few stitches over the top in place, as I say, just to anchor that thread off. And then just take a little stitch again. Just get a little bit of the thread, oops, like that. We're going to wrap our thread around 1, 2, 3 times, hold the thread on the needle, and then pull those threads down and you get a little surgeon's knot. And then poke your needle through, and that'll give you, put a bit of tension on it when you cut your thread, and that will give you your finished body and limbs. So we've got the 2 legs with the feet going outwards, and we've got our seam there, so we know we've got a left and a right for attaching onto our body. And then we've got the 2 arms with the seams at the top here again, and we've got a left and a right for our body there, for our arms to go on to. And we're going to put these 2 on side now, because the next thing that we're going to be working on is we're actually going to be working on the head. And as I say, I just like to have these all ready so that when we're ready to put everything together with the head, then we've got all of these bits finished, because once you see the cute head, you want to get on and put everything together. So let me just turn the camera around and I'll just round up for today, and then we'll go on to the next part, which will be doing the head. Okay, so it's a little bit later in the day. You can tell by the light, and I've got a quite harsh overhead light here. We've got a body already with our tummy and our bottom, and then our chest, and this is where the head's going to go. We've then got our 2 legs, which we're going to attach later, and then the 2 arms as well. So that's all ready to be done. So for now, that's it for here. If you have enjoyed the video and I've given you some tips and tricks for sewing your character, then please do consider subscribing to the channel. Obviously purely voluntary, but it's nice if you can hit that, or give the video a thumbs up to like it as well. That's always very useful. And if you want to leave a comment, then I'm always happy to hear from you, and I do try and answer every single comment that I get. But for now, I'm going to go off, and tomorrow we'll have a look at making the head, and then we'll be able to put the head onto the body and put all that together again and construct it. So it's going to be in several different parts, but each one will build on from the last one, and at the end of it you'll have a completed Lillian Lamb, and then we'll be ready to then start on her clothes, and we'll work through each item of her clothing and then finish with her little flower crown at the end. So, okay. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls again for gifting me the kit so that I can bring this video to you. And I hope that you've enjoyed stitching with me today. Happy stitching, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.